This is Dr. Jerome Corsi, and today is Wednesday, May 31st, 2023, last day of May. And we actually have quite a few stories to cover today, so we're going to jump right into it. The first I noticed is in the debt ceiling agreement, which is just an agreement to spend more money, trillions of dollars more. It doesn't seem to be any limit. It was a kabuki dance, as we expected. We had the GOP pretending like they wanted to cut spending, and then in the end pretty much caving. But there was one agreement I noticed, and that is that the debt ceiling agreement prohibits the Biden administration from extending the pause on student loan repayments that have been in place since March 2020. Now, this does not end the Biden administration's loan forgiveness plan, which was going to wipe out $20,000 up to that amount in federal loans per borrower. That's being made by the Supreme Court. This is a separate issue. This is the pandemic, $5 billion per month in student loan the extension of this student population that now largely they're in after college that are still paying off student debts. But if this can't be extended, it means that the student loan forgiveness plan essentially is going to mean repayment starts, and that's going to cut dramatically into the income of the people who have student debt loans. We've got a problem here in that you've got so much debt out there that there's about $1.7 trillion in student loan debt. They've been in forbearance. About 64% of that have been in forbearance for the last 3 years, amounting to $1.1 trillion. There's 25 million Americans who have deferred payments for student debt. They're aged 18 to 44 years old, and this is one of the most important demographic groups that drive spending in the United States, and spending has become really the engine which has kept the economy, consumer spending, from falling apart. Now, if these students have got to start again repaying the student debt, it's going to cut dramatically into their purchasing power, and it will be an economic drag. Now, that goes along with the next story we posted, which is, again, these are coming from Zero Hedge, which is a very good zerohedge.com, which I follow very closely every day. Small business spending is going down. So essentially, we're seeing a drop in consumer spending, which has been pumped up by the pandemic, pouring out of money, people getting checks from the government for nothing. But there's been a dramatic reversal of what was a strong consumer trend, where we now have $1 trillion in credit card debt in the United States. That's the first time ever that large. And what we're seeing is that the people now are using their credit cards less because they've already maxed them out. So the American household is hitting a brick wall, dropping by 1.2% for the first time since February 2021, the amount of credit card debt that's accumulating. And so if we look at these trends, what we're seeing is basically that the spending power of the U.S. consumer is really getting dramatically hurt by the inflation. Again, the after-tax wages for the higher income households has also contracted by 1.3% year to year in April 2023, which is the second consecutive month of decline, and a powerful wake-up call to the Fed, which believes that all wages are rising at a mid 4% annual rate. It's just not so. This Bank of America Institute report is saying that the small business activity that is slowing down reflects the income strain inflation is causing upon the average American. And when that happens, basically capital spending, small business capital spending dries up. This is a cascading effect which will contract the economy. So if we see, basically, if we look at the bottom line of this, is that the engine which has driven the economy, buoyed up by the government doing all this pandemic money, people getting money in their accounts free and not having to repay it. That was a stimulus. It worked when the economy was locked down to keep things rolling, but now it's drying up. And as it dries up, we're going to have economic downturns. Now, I want to focus on for just a minute, make sure everybody's aware of this new book we've written. This is with Dean Heskin. We're going to begin publicizing this very actively over the next few days and weeks. It's how the coming global crash will create an historic gold rush. What we're predicting in this book, and it's a fairly easy read. It's a very well written, hopefully, book. But if you want to know what's going to happen, and I started writing this months ago, and what it predicts is happening now. Chris, if you will, thank you for showing why don't you explain on the website how people can order the book, and also any comments you might have on the economics here we're discussing.
Of course. You can go right to the Truth Central page, thetruthcentral.com. We have a book section. You have Dr. Corsi's books right here. The first one is the book we're talking about here, How the Coming Global Crash Will Create an Historic Gold Rush. We also have the two other recent books here as well, and we've heard about those. But you can find them here on thetruthcentral.com. As far as the student loan debt situation, that's a funny thing because President Biden had to kind of tread the water on this during the general election. He had to kind of give lip service to the idea you have to pay back your loans, but the far left, who pretty much put him where he is, and the people who are controlling him, are saying, well, you know what? To get these young kids out there to vote, you have to tell them you're going to try to do something about it. Took a while. He pulled it off. This obviously, the whole thing's unconstitutional. We know that. The problem is this, and here's what I believe, Jerry. It's not the loans. It's not. College is way too expensive. But young people are going to what we call diploma mills now. They're going to these colleges because they were fed over the years that they have to go to college in order to succeed. So they go to these colleges that may have, let's say, less than stringent acceptance levels, if you will. They talk about how great and diverse and fun the campus is. They attract a bunch of people and bring in loads of money. And they come in taking gender studies, PC studies, that sort of thing. I don't know. Well, the point I'm trying to make is they take these curricula that aren't going to be worth anything when they get out. They come out thinking they're the smartest people in the world and they're entitled to a job because that's what they were told. All of a sudden, they can't find anything. Their degrees are worthless.
To monitor this.
Right. Instead of paying these people, instead of the taxpayers funding this, many of these colleges should give these students a refund because you're selling a defective product to them.
Well, and the truth is, I think you've got so much right now out there in the the endowments of these colleges that they could virtually subsidize, if they wanted to, the tuition for a lot of people. And maybe that's the way it ought to go. I think again, we're in a situation where the colleges have just got too much money and they are too woke. They're not teaching, they're not educating students, and it is a problem.
Tenured woke professors are making six figures.
I know, it's unbelievable.
They're wasting money. The funny thing is, these are profit-making degrees because you're not sending kids to labs. You're not bringing in equipment because you have some guy talking for six figures and that's about it. Not a lot of overhead considering the money that's going in there. On the other hand, the administrations are bloated. College is expensive for a lot of reasons, and nobody investigates that.
Good points, Chris. Thank you. Let's continue here. The next story. This is from Lee Smith, who's now working with the Epoch Times. Lee Smith is an excellent investigative reporter. And there's a new video I want people to be aware of because it's quite well done. It's talking about finally there's a backlash against this climate fanatic agenda. People are realizing it's a lower standard of living. When you see the film and you see how much land is being devoted to wind farms and solar panels and all this stuff that's going to become junk in a few years, made in China largely, and producing energy, but not enough to really power a city. It's enormously wasteful, this electric car, electric vehicle, solar, wind, battery technology, while doable, it's really bizarre because we have more powerful technologies with either nuclear fuel, which U.S. Navy runs on nuclear fuel. We don't have nuclear accidents every day. We can have smaller nuclear power plants that power communities. There's a lot that can be done with nuclear power. Hydrocarbon fuel is not fossil fuel. It's readily available. It's cheap. It's a major point in my book on the truth about energy, global warming, and climate change. And this whole climate change agenda is essentially hype aimed at ending capitalism. It's a neo-Marxist agenda. It's not legitimate climate science. I really encourage people to watch this video. I think the video has a lot of merit to it. And when you see it, you get a strong impression of just how strong we've been lied to. I'm covering these fairly quickly because I want to pack in a lot in this time today. It really intrigued me. Here's another interesting thing coming from the Epoch Times. There's a book coming out called Swift Boating America. Now, this particularly appeals to me because with John O'Neill, who was a swift boat veteran, in 2004, I co-authored Unfit for Command. That was the swift boat veterans speak out against John Kerry. Swift boats were small boats used in Vietnam, and John Kerry thought he was emulating John Kennedy. John Kennedy commanded a PT boat, another small boat in World War II. Kerry thought he would command a swift boat in Vietnam, get all these medals and honors, and come back and run for president. Well, as it turned out, Kerry came back and was with the Vietnam Veterans Against the War. I was not in the Vietnam War. I had eczema. I was disqualified medically. My skin rashes and problems were disqualified me from going to fight in Vietnam. At any rate, I did my service by working in various academic institutes that were involved with military intelligence and other groups working to evaluate the protest movements. I bird-dogged Kerry in his swiftboat Vietnam Veterans Against the War activity. And the book, I think, had a major impact in showing that John Kerry was a fraud, a leftist fraud, who wanted to give nuclear weapons to Iran. He still does. And this book about Hillary coming out, which I think is going to be pretty interesting. I'm certainly going to read it. And I encourage people to go over to the Epoch Times. You can read the first part of it. They're excerpting it. It's being written by a Hans Monke. I don't know who he is. I'll have to find out and get in touch with him. But anyway, the argument of the book is that Hillary Clinton, especially after the Durham report, we know this is true, concocted, made out of whole cloth, the Russian collusion narrative because she wanted to cover up her email scandals, both when she was Secretary of State. She had a private email server that she should have been prosecuted for violating national security laws, except that the Department of Justice doesn't prosecute Democrats. By the way, I saw a judge is also allowing the Clinton Foundation case now to be re-examined. Clinton Foundation is clearly fraudulent. I wrote a book on that called Partners in Crime. I've been trying to cover these issues for years. But at any rate, I think this book is going to be very good because it shows that Trump, who repeatedly said in the campaign trail things that, for instance, he wasn't very much in favor of Ukraine joining NATO. That was anathema to the foreign policy establishment, the State Department. And the media ran all these headlines proclaiming that Trump had abandoned Ukraine and ditched Europe because he was in collusion with Russia. And Clinton, it was a smear campaign by Hillary Clinton, and it was also designed to cover up the emails that had been stolen from the DNC computer and Assange was releasing. Democratic National Committee was embarrassed by these, and I think ultimately it hurt Hillary's campaign. Again, I was involved. The Mueller investigation or Mueller investigation thought I had a connection with Assange. That would be their last piece of putting in place the Russian collusion indictment of Donald Trump. I did not have a connection to Assange. I figured out myself in advance that Assange had Podesta's emails. I told that to Roger Stone, who told it to Trump, and I turned out to be right. So the Department of Justice gave me a plea deal. They were going to indict me for lying. And if I'd accepted the plea deal, they would have had their case made, because they say, see, Corsi lied. He had a tie to Assange. He just didn't want to admit it. I refused their plea deal. They did not indict me. I did not have a tie to Assange. And the Mueller investigation shut down after they couldn't break me. I'm really looking forward to this book, and I'm pleased that they titled it Swift Boating. I want to see, in fact, how swift boating is a term that, from my vocabulary, is not running a dirt campaign that's false to hurt a politician, which is how the left wants to portray it. The left wants to see John Kerry as a hero. I think it's portraying the truth about someone that ultimately destroys their career because they are evil and have done criminal and disastrous things for the security of the United States. That includes John Kerry and Hillary Clinton. And I think this will be a good book. Okay, now, and Chris, you want to comment on that?
Again, the media is ignoring this story. They're ignoring the Durham report, because not only will it make their beloved sainted Hillary look bad, it would make them look bad. I remember when Robert Reich, whatever his name, Robert Reich, that's it, the former secretary of...
I think it was Reich they said. Maybe they said it Reich. I don't know.
He pronounces it Reich.
He says Reich. Well, he doesn't want to be like Third Reich. He wants to be Reich. Okay,
exactly. So Robert Reich said, posted...
And he was a leftist. He was...
Yes.
He was what was he? Economic secretary or
labor
secretary under Clinton
administration, labor secretary.
That's what I thought.
Another
Harvard economist, I believe.
There you go.
And completely leftist.
Right. He posted, I believe it was Twitter. I think it was Twitter, but he posted that there was going to be a day of reckoning for all media members and all those politicians who lied about what was going on with Donald Trump and lied about all this other stuff, and when everything gets uncovered. Well, the fact is, everything is uncovered. We found out who was lying about Trump, and there's absolutely no day of reckoning. It's always it's like, my bad. Let's sweep it under the rug. Don't worry about it. Let's move on. Let's all be friends again.
The politicization of this woke capture of the bureaucracy, the media, the Department of Justice is insane. And Victor David Hanson's writing some very good things. I'm going to have to cover them. Maybe we'll do that tomorrow, about this woke nonsense, about how insane it is. We got to worry about gender identity and your gender identity, and you get all these transformational changes and the like. By the way, there's another good book, and I'm going to pull it off my shelf. I have to turn around for a minute.
See, those are real books back there. It's not a background. It's not doing that background where people put their fake books in the background.
These are books that I read them, and I do read them. This book, this is a great book. I just read it over the weekend. Jonathan Cahn, I'm going to have to try to get him on, Chris. Let's see if we can get Jonathan Cahn on the show. Return of the Gods. He did Harbinger, which was a great book about the World Trade Center and how putting up these towers was hubris, and God was going to not be favored by the fact that we didn't understand it was a rebuke we ought to take seriously. Return of the Gods is all about that when we go to a secular society, the gods come back in, and the gods who come back in are the ancient gods, Baal, Ishtar, Molech, and they want to basically do this metamorphosis of men and women. They want to do gender identity. They want to kill children. It's a very evil agenda, but it was the ancient agenda. It does a very good job of showing how this agenda was, the Israelites, when Moses was on Mount Sinai, did a golden calf and began worshiping Baal. This was a Babylonian god. This was throughout Mesopotamia. these were very powerful and very destructive and religions, mythologies. And what Khan is saying is that this is woke back again because we started abandoning God when we took prayer out of the school starting in the 1940s and 1950s. That's an excellent book. I want to get Jonathan Cahn on the show. Let's see if we can do that. Okay, so let's continue here. The next story about Russia and Ukraine. Well, Ukraine looks like they now have recently begun having these drone strikes in Moscow, and they've also been shelling Russian cities. I'm convinced that the Ukraine has figured out the only way they can have any chance of achieving their goals. I think their goals are really to get more money in order to steal it, and then more weaponry. And there's an intense, insane warmongering going on right now by the Democrats and NATO trying to poke the bear, Russia. Ukraine is, without all the military assistance, without the weaponry, the money we're giving them would capitulate in a week. And now Russia's begun to inflict significant damage on Kiev, or like the left likes to say, what do they say? What do they call it, Chris? Kyiv or something like that. They're calling Ukraine the capital of Ukraine now. I'm not sure.
It's now Kyiv.
Yeah, well, they left. These guys are nuts on the left. They keep redefining words and all the rest of it.
They had to run to Biden's defense when he started
taking money and the Biden family corruption out of Ukraine. So now it's Kyiv, and so it's cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Now it fits in the New York cocktail series, so we don't have to. It's now chic.
It was always Kiev in the American media until that moment.
Yeah, well, still Kiev to me. And these drone strikes and shelling are going to expand the war. I think Ukraine wants to bring NATO into the war officially, which would be the beginning of World War III. And Moscow has already moved nuclear weapons, tactical nukes into Belarus. They did that last week. And this whole ramping up of the conflict to get Ukraine into NATO is insane. I've written articles on, I'm going to do more on the Gateway Pundit, where I've argued that the Ukraine war began in 2013 when the Clinton Foundation began accepting money from a Ukrainian oligarch who wanted to oppose Russia. And Hillary Clinton agreed with the State Department, or really motivated the State Department to work with Soros, and they began this Maidan rebellion in 2014, which was one of the color revolutions. If you recall, Obama had the Arab Spring in all these different countries, and he was trying to overthrow, in many cases, legitimately Democratic elected governments to put in radical governments. He wanted to promote the Muslim Brotherhood. And I'll probably write a book on this to try to convey all this. But at any rate, their goal was to oust Yanukovych, who was a duly elected but Russian-oriented president of Ukraine. They succeeded. Paul Manafort, by the way, who was Donald Trump's campaign advisor, put in prison by the Mueller investigation, was demonized because he had a contract helping Yanukovych. The State Department wanted him gone. The State Department then wanted to impeach Donald Trump for his conversation with Zelensky because he dared to raise the issue of Biden's corruption, where the Biden family stole billions of dollars, including U.S. aid, including money from the International Monetary Fund. It's just gone. And more needs to be written about this to be bringing attention to the American people. But the Ukraine war started with Clinton Foundation making money, Biden making money, the Democrats pushing Ukraine into NATO, which is a direct assault to Russia, which has always needed access to the Atlantic through the Black Sea, which makes Crimea and Sevastopol, which are port areas and very strategically located in the Black Sea for access to the Mediterranean. That can't be, Russia's not going to let that be choked off. Russia now controls the Black Sea and are threatening to cut off Ukraine's ability to export grain and corn through the Black Sea. Ukraine's been now swamping Poland and other markets with their grain and corn, which depressed prices in Poland. So again, we have the beginning of World War III here, and the reporting that the Ukrainians are freedom fighters and we have to oppose Russia. I think John Kennedy was right. Kennedy wrote 26, and Robert Kennedy Jr. has been talking about this, wrote 26 private letters to Khrushchev and said, our military industrial complexes are controlling both countries and they want nuclear war. If we work together, Kennedy said to Khrushchev, we can avoid this. They began talking to each other. And in fact, that was instrumental in ending the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. Jack Kennedy was moving forward. He gave a great speech at American University. He said the Russians and us, we basically want the same things. We want to grow old. We want to die in our beds surrounded by our families and grandchildren. And we want to live at peace. But the military-industrial complex, which Eisenhower warned us about in his farewell address, as he was leaving the presidency in 1961, is right. The military-industrial complex controls this war machine and are making billions of dollars producing the weapons. The Democratic Party has hated Russia ever since the Berlin Wall went down and Russia renounced communism. Well, that made the Democrats angry at Russia. So we've had nothing but Russia problems from the Democrats because they want communism. Chris, you want to comment on that?
Let's add to this. There's another front that the NATO and, of course, the West is fighting against Russia. It's not just Ukraine, but yesterday, Antony Blinken was meeting with a bunch of NATO nations and had a press conference with the Swedish Prime Minister discussing bringing Sweden into NATO. So now you're talking about bringing more Baltic nations into the front, ones that very closely border the old Soviet Union, Russia, if you will. Again, maybe designed to antagonize Vladimir Putin. I'm no fan of this guy's either.
Well, neither am I. I'm not a Putin fan.
Yeah, but the idea is if they're trying to push a war and bankrupt our own nations at the same time, we do have an issue here.
Well, the woke agenda.
What do they want? What's the
woke agenda? Wants destruction. They want war. They want chaos. So that's why Jonathan Cahn's book is so important and so good. And I'll have a book that comes out pretty soon on the truth about neo-Marxism, cultural Maoism, and anarchy. And I'll have to get in touch with Jonathan Cahn and let him know about this because our books are very compatible. A couple more stories I really want to cover. There's a very, very good story over at oilprice.com today, written by Simon Watkins, who is saying that Moscow has signed 10 new cooperation agreements with Iran and China's signing agreements with Iran. Moscow signed 10 cooperation agreements alone on May 18th. China waited for the dust to settle before it signed new cooperation agreements with Iran on the 23rd of May. You're getting and Iran is going to resurface despite the sanctions. John Kerry and Biden are not stopping Iran from getting nuclear weapons. And Iran is going to get a lot of revenue from re-entering the oil business and being active in international markets that were blocked during the Trump administration. Iran will use that money to expand terrorism in the Middle East and to go against Israel, which it's vowed to destroy with nuclear weapons. I wrote the book called Atomic Iran 2006. Now, this Simon Watkins, I'm begun to follow. He wrote a book. This is a book published here. Let me see if I can get it to. Yeah, there we go. Simon Watkins. This book was published in London, and about the new oil market order. It's quite an extensive book. I mean, it's very heavily academic, a lot of charts, a lot of numbers, but he's got a very, very compelling point, and I'm going to read this book. His emphasis is that the China and Russia are reconfiguring hydrocarbon fuels that the BRIC nations are going to use, and the BRIC nations, which is Britain, Russia, India, China, and South Africa has joined them. That's the BRICS, those countries, which are going to expand. They're going to have their meeting in June in Saudi Arabia. They're going to expand the number of BRIC countries. And if this configuration takes place, especially with all the infrastructure that Russia and China are building in the Middle East and all through Europe, the initiative from China, this initiative to build roads, pipelines, etc. All of this is going to reconfigure economic power away from the United States while we're self-destructing with this stupid climate change agenda. That's the last point I want to comment on, which is yesterday I mentioned this article. Now I wanted to post it on thetruthcentral.com. There's a new study out which shows that what they call this Doomsday Glacier in Antarctica, which, Al Gore said is melting away and they were losing the polar ice caps. Well, scientists have measured this. They go back with ice core data. And this glacier is actually thicker than it was 8,000 years ago, which is the point I make in The Truth About Energy, Global Warming, and Climate Change, which is climate science. A very minor part of climate science is carbon dioxide. Most textbooks until this left hysteria, we're going to destroy the world unless we go back to a primitive lifestyle and start eating bugs instead of meat. We convert farmland into all these fields for solar panels. And by the way, there's good evidence emerging that the solar panels put in the desert are reducing the ability of the desert areas to absorb carbon dioxide, which they do regularly, part of the Earth's natural climate mechanisms, which are largely feedback mechanisms. They're dynamic. One thing forces another to happen. It's a feedback mechanism. And it's a very complex nonlinear system, how the climate works. It is not one variable like a trace molecule. Carbon dioxide, which is like 4/100th or 1,000th of 1% of the atmosphere, among the global warming, what they call these greenhouse gas molecules, water vapor, not clouds, but water vapor, water in the atmosphere, is 70% of all greenhouse gases on Earth. So essentially, what these studies are done, and the study is quite credible. I mean, I've looked at it and may write about this, but again, it's this whole glacier in the Antarctic that has been studied, and the left is saying is melting. It's 8 times thicker than it was for most of the last 8,000 years of the Holocene, with a thickness range between 2 meters and 7 meters. So the new study undermines the claim that the ice melt which has recently occurred is unprecedented or unnatural. The thickness of the ice shelf here averages about 40 meters today. So again, there is a natural process of give and take in how the Earth functions. And time series analysis doesn't let you take one little downturn and say that's going to continue forever. It doesn't work that way. It takes dramatic cataclysmic changes for the Earth to fundamentally change. It's like inertia. The Earth continues along in a pattern unless something happens. And what happens is usually the sun starts shining less bright and we get a little ice age, or our orbit around the Earth, which it does every 100,000 years, gets more elliptical. We're farther away from the sun at the extreme, and we have a massive ice age. These are the kinds of cataclysmic changes, major changes that produce something like global warming or global cooling, and it has nothing to do with the amount of carbon dioxide. The amount of carbon dioxide has been decreasing in the atmosphere through like the last 2 or 3 billion years. And so the lies being told by the left are enormous. And that's why I've wanted to call this website and podcast thetruthcentral.com. Chris, any final comments before we wrap up?
You do know that the wildfires in Nova Scotia there's a wildfire in Nova Scotia and one in Alberta that's been making big news up north here, as you know. But it didn't take very long for a place like the hard-hitting journalists of the Canada National Observer blamed it on climate change.
Yeah, right. Anything that happens is climate change.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so if we have a change in the El Nino and La Nina so that we get more rainfall it'll be climate change. If there's more drought, it will be climate change. And anything that happens is climate change. Well, that means that, there you go. Well, that's all nonsense, because if you attribute everything to climate change, then climate change is nothing except this overall universal explanation, which means nothing, that's applied ideologically. And that's what we've got. The reality to the woke generation is flexible. It means nothing. It's idiosyncratically determined. It's almost like schizophrenia determines individual reality, which then gets universalized. It's a very bizarre phenomenon. Chris, let's wrap up because we're going over time. We covered a lot of stories today. Please look at our sponsors. Take a look at My Vital C. Matt McMillan, the McMillan Agency, can help you get annuities and universal life that are modern. Just fill out the form. Take a look at this Walking Liberty $50 offer that is Swiss America. And take a look at the new book, which I'm doing with Dean Haskin. We're going to be doing quite a bit about this in the future. This is Dr. Jerome Corsi. Today is Wednesday, May 31st, 2023. In the end, God always wins. God will win here too. May not be easy, may not be fun, but God will win. It would be nice if people understood 2 Chronicles 7:14 and came back and repented for our sins. If we do our part, God will take care of the rest. Thank you for joining us. We're broadcasting on The Truth Central every weekday. We'll be back tomorrow. Thank you for joining us. God bless.